The night everything cracked open began with a storm that felt almost scripted. Cold rain pounded against the razor wire of MDC Brooklyn as thunder rolled low over the East River, shaking the windows like a warning only the sky understood. It was 1:58 a.m. when the first power flicker hit, just long enough for cameras to black out for a second, just long enough for the magnetic locks to hum oddly in their frames, just long enough for every guard on the night shift to tense. Storm nights always made federal facilities feel haunted. But no one knew that, deep in the South Wing, something far more dangerous than weather was unfolding cell by cell. At 2:07 a.m., Officer Ramirez walked the C-tier with a flashlight cutting through the storm-darkened hall. He paused mid-step. Something felt off, like the air itself had shifted. Before we move on, I need to be completely honest with you. Every time I check the stats, my heart drops, because almost 99% of you watch these videos, but never subscribe. Your one click truly makes a huge difference. It pushes stories like this into the spotlight so more people can see what's really happening. So please take a moment to subscribe. It means more than you know. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that no matter how far apart we are, these stories still connect us. Then he saw it. Diddy's cell door, usually sealed with federal-grade locking bolts, was not fully shut, not open, not forced, but a fraction ajar, just wide enough that the lock strip didn't fully engage. Ramirez whispered, "No way," under his breath. It wasn't possible. These doors don't open unless they're opened. He radioed command immediately. Within 60 seconds, 3 supervisors and 2 armed officers were rushing down the tier. When they pushed the door, it slid open too easily. Inside, the bunk was empty. The sheets were cold. The sink dripped steadily. And worst of all, there was no sign of a struggle, no sign of a forced removal, no sign of anything except one chilling fact. Sean Diddy Combs was gone. The warden was pulled out of bed. Alarms triggered the full facility lockdown. Sirens blared through the corridors. Heavy steel gates slammed shut one by one, echoing through the concrete like gunshots. Inmates shouted in confusion as red lights strobed overhead. Tactical teams geared up. K-9 units sprinted into the lower hallways. The building felt like it was breathing hard, panicked, alive. At 2:16 a.m., the command center isolated a heat signature on sub-level 3, a restricted maintenance zone that had been closed off since 2009. Guards swarmed toward the freight elevator, flashlights shaking in their hands. The elevator panel was loose. The lock frame was scratched. Dust coated the ground in uneven patches as though someone had stepped through recently. They moved in formation toward the back of the corridor. The closer they got, the more obvious it became. Someone had been down there for a while. Someone had been working. Someone had been preparing. Then they saw him. Diddy was crouched behind an industrial generator, rain-soaked, shaking, breathing fast like a trapped animal. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He just stared at the tactical officers with wide, frantic eyes. In his hands was something that made every officer freeze. A laminated, folded map of the lower maintenance shafts, marked with red pen lines tracing a path toward the freight lift. A path toward escape. They took him down instantly. His voice cracked through the commotion. "They put it there. I don't know what's happening. I swear, someone's trying to set me up." But no one believed him. Not when the map was in his hand, not when the cell door was tampered with, not when his disappearance aligned perfectly with the storm blackout. By 3 a.m., the news had leaked. It always does. A guard whispered to a cousin. A cousin posted on Twitter. Within minutes, every major outlet was scrambling to confirm the same explosive line. Breaking, Diddy discovered outside cell during lockdown. Possible escape attempt underway. By sunrise, the nation was glued to screens. Aerial footage showed the prison under complete siege. Officials stayed silent. Rumors went wild. Had Diddy tried to break out? Was he being helped from the inside? And most terrifying of all, if this was an escape attempt, how close had he come to succeeding? And at 7:42 a.m., as federal agents began ripping apart the maintenance corridor, they found the detail that turned speculation into panic. Fresh concrete dust near the sealed supply shaft, a pry bar hidden behind insulation, and boot prints matching Diddy's federal issue shoes. The prison wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. This wasn't an inmate wandering down the wrong hallway. This was movement toward a destination. The Department of Justice launched an emergency inquiry. The FBI took control of the facility, and SDNY requested immediate access to the evidence. The storm outside finally eased, but inside MDC the real storm was only beginning. Because if the early investigation was correct, and if the path Diddy took matched the red lines drawn across that forbidden blueprint, then the world was staring at the unthinkable. Diddy hadn't been found near a random maintenance corridor. He had been 20 minutes away from the only unrepaired structural breach in the entire building. A breach that led straight to a disused service tunnel. A tunnel that could have let him out. The country held its breath. The system shook, and a second aftershock was already forming. Because what investigators found next made the escape attempt look small compared to the truth behind it. The investigation into the forbidden maintenance corridor began before the sun had even broken through the storm clouds. By the time daylight hit the razor wire outside MDC Brooklyn, federal agents were already crawling through every inch of the sublevel with flashlights, cameras, and forensic kits. The air down there was cold and stale, heavy with dust. Pipes groaned overhead. Water dripped rhythmically from a cracked valve, echoing down the concrete passage like a metronome to a nightmare no one saw coming. At first glance, the corridor looked like any other abandoned section of an old federal facility. Dark, unused, forgotten. But the closer agents examined the walls, the clearer the truth became. Someone had been down here very recently. Fresh scrape marks lined the outer edge of the sealed freight elevator frame. Patches of concrete had been chipped away with a narrow control tool. The ground bore a trail of disturbed dust, leading directly toward the sealed supply shaft that engineers had abandoned years ago due to structural instability. And then they saw them, footprints. Not random, not chaotic. They followed a path, one after the other, leading to the far end of the corridor. Prints that matched the tread of Diddy's federal issue shoes, confirmed minutes later by on-site analysts. Agents moved deeper in tactical formation, beams cutting across rusted pipes and grimy concrete. When they reached the old shaft door, they froze. The bolts that had sealed the panel for 5 years were no longer intact. Someone had loosened them from the inside. Faint chips of gray cement dust covered the floor in a fresh layer. And buried under that dust, they found something that made the lead investigator curse under his breath. A pry bar. It was wedged behind insulation, still carrying flecks of wet concrete and, worse, skin cells on the grip. A forensics officer swabbed it immediately. Another pulled the insulation back further, revealing a narrow gap behind the collapsed passage. Just wide enough to continue working. Just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if it were widened. Just wide enough to become a viable exit route. Someone had Someone had begun breaking open an escape tunnel. Inside the command center, the warden stared at the live feed from the investigation floor, gripping the desk with white knuckles. His face looked hollow, sunken. Who had access to that corridor? He demanded. No one had an answer. The maintenance logs were incomplete. The keycard history had several gaps, and one guard's ID had been used to access the freight elevator the night before the storm, even though she hadn't been scheduled. She hadn't shown up for work since. At 10:45 a.m., an FBI tech sorting through the debris found another piece of evidence, a folded sheet of laminated paper half torn, wedged under a panel near the floor. It was a building blueprint, the 2005 Master Architectural Plan of MDC Brooklyn, a version no inmate should ever see. Not only was it perfectly preserved, but a thick red line had been drawn across one section. The path from Diddy's cell unit to the freight elevator, then down to the maintenance shaft, and then straight toward the collapsed tunnel. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Each section marked, circled, underlined. Yin stared in disbelief. This wasn't an impulsive act. It wasn't a desperate lunge toward freedom. It was orchestrated, calculated, weeks in the making. How did he get this? The warden muttered, voice shaking. But before anyone could answer, another discovery sent chills through the room. Behind the freight elevator's inner panel, tucked into a gap in the metal frame, was a small black rectangle, a burner phone, screen smashed, battery half ripped out, but not fully destroyed. Someone had tried to wipe it and failed. Digital forensics began extracting data immediately. The first recovered fragment was a text message draft. Storm tonight, move during blackout, window open for 11 minutes, shaft unlocked. The second fragment was even worse. If he hesitates, push him. We can't risk him changing his mind. Agents stared at each other. This wasn't just an escape attempt. This looked like coercion. This looked like a setup. This looked like someone else had chosen the night, the timing, the blackout, and pushed Diddy into the corridor. The name attached to the message draft was a single word, Carter, a name investigators recognized instantly. Carter had once been part of Diddy's private security team, a specialist, a man tied to offshore accounts, questionable contracts, and rumored black bag operations. He left the country right after the original sentencing. His whereabouts were unknown. Inside the courthouse hours later, prosecutors whispered urgently with FBI agents as the warden paced, pale and sweating. If the external network that once protected Diddy was involved in this plot, the implications were catastrophic. If Carter was involved, then this wasn't an escape attempt at all. It was something worse, because the second recovered message, still partially scrambled, contained one more chilling line. He talks, we're finished. At 2:30 p.m., SDNY filed for an emergency hearing. Outside MDC, crowds swelled. Protesters screamed. Reporters went live every 5 minutes with new rumor after rumor. Social media erupted with theories, some saying Diddy had orchestrated the escape himself, others insisting he was being forced into something far more dangerous. But inside the prison walls, agents were reaching a terrifying conclusion. Diddy hadn't wandered into that corridor. He hadn't accidentally followed a path mapped in red ink. He hadn't found the pry bar, the blueprint, the burner phone by chance. Someone had created the opportunity. Someone had opened the path. Someone had guided him toward the shaft. And the question hanging over the entire investigation was one that no one dared answer aloud yet. Was Diddy trying to escape or trying to survive? By the time the investigation reached Diddy's tier, the prison felt less like a correctional facility and more like the epicenter of a federal manhunt. Agents in tactical vests swarmed every cell, every vent, every pipe, while digital forensics teams unpacked equipment normally reserved for national security breaches. No one had ever seen MDC Brooklyn like this. Even veteran officers walked the halls in stunned silence, whispering that whatever was happening now was bigger than anything they had ever been briefed on. Inside Diddy's cell, the air was thick with the smell of dust and disinfectant as forensic lights swept across the walls. The bunk was stripped bare. The mattress was peeled back. The vents were unscrewed and opened. Every crease, every corner was examined. At first, agents thought the cell had already given up its biggest secret, a tampered lock and an inmate missing during a blackout. But the truth was hidden deeper than the concrete walls. It was hiding in the one place no one expected, the underside of the steel bunk frame. A technician crouched, shining a narrow beam beneath the metal slats. Something glinted, something that didn't belong. "We've got another device," he whispered. Within seconds, the room filled with agents. They lifted the bunk slowly, carefully, revealing a slim, matte black object magnetized to the underside. When they pulled it free, the entire investigation shifted in a single heartbeat. It wasn't a phone. It wasn't a tool. It was a signal booster, the kind used by cartels, espionage operatives, and high-level criminal networks to extend encrypted communication signals inside dead zones. It was capable of bouncing a cell signal off disguised towers. And worse, the device had been recently active. A small green diode still blinked faintly, like a heartbeat refusing to die. The warden swore aloud. The agents exchanged grim looks. Diddy shouldn't have had access to this. No inmate should, no guard should. This wasn't smuggled in by luck. This required coordination, expertise, and someone on the inside who knew exactly what they were doing. The device was rushed upstairs for analysis, but investigators weren't done. As the bunk was fully removed, A small magnetic pouch slid out and clattered to the floor. Inside was something even more alarming. A tiny battery-powered micro-shredder, the kind used to destroy notes quietly before bed checks. Dust filled the air as forensic gloves reached in to retrieve the fragments. Dozens of shredded paper strips lay inside, some only a few millimeters long. The reconstruction began immediately under high-intensity lamps. Bit by bit, line by line, words began to reappear. Meet point. South shaft. Confirm guard timing. Storm window. It's phase 2 now. And then the sentence that made the lead investigator's skin crawl. If he resists, push him. The room fell silent. The implication was unmistakable. Someone wasn't just planning an escape. Someone was planning to force one. By early afternoon, the signal booster was fully analyzed. It had recorded a small fragment of audio, likely by accident, during a mishandling of the device. When the agents played it back, the courtroom would later describe the feeling as electric dread. The playback began with static, then a muffled voice. Storm confirmed. He moves tonight. Another voice followed, colder, lower. Get him to the south shaft. Make sure he doesn't freeze. A pause. If he talks, we're finished. That last sentence sucked the air from the room. It didn't sound like someone helping Diddy escape a life sentence. It sounded like someone protecting themselves from whatever Diddy knew. The FBI immediately widened the investigation. They cross-checked the voices with known associates. They re-examined Diddy's financial ties. And soon one name kept reappearing. Carter, the missing ex-security contractor whose fingerprints matched the burner phone casing recovered from the freight elevator shaft. Meanwhile, Diddy sat in an interview room, cuffed, exhausted, shaking, insisting he didn't plan anything. I didn't ask for anyone, he repeated. I didn't want to run. Why would I? They're trying to set me up. They're trying to bury me. But the evidence stacking against him was impossible to ignore. The blueprint, the pry bar, the burner messages, the extracted audio, and now the signal booster buried beneath his bunk. It painted a picture, whether accurate or manipulated, of a man preparing or being prepared to escape. At 3:52 p.m., prosecutors filed their emergency petition with SDNY. The judge, already alerted by phone, demanded an immediate review. He wanted every document, every recording, every forensic detail. He wanted to see the map, the shredded notes, the blueprint with the red faces marked. And he wanted to hear the audio for himself. News outlets got hold of the petition minutes later. Breaking alerts detonated across every screen in America. Diddy escape conspiracy, new evidence found. Federal agents discover signal device in cell. Is a shadow network controlling the case? The public narrative fractured instantly. Some believed Diddy had masterminded the escape. Others believed he was being hunted from the inside out. But one truth overshadowed everything. The justice system had never seen anything like this. And the judge, now visibly shaken by the briefing, made his decision with a single line. Court will convene at 12:30 p.m. tomorrow for emergency hearing. The world collectively inhaled, because when the judge walked into that room, he wasn't just deciding on a violation. He was deciding whether Diddy had tried to break out, or whether someone else had tried to permanently silence him. By noon the next day, Manhattan looked like it was bracing for an earthquake. Helicopters circled the Southern District Courthouse like vultures waiting for a body to drop. Streets were barricaded. Mounted police kept crowds back. Reporters shouted into microphones every few seconds as new rumors surfaced. Protesters on both sides collided in waves of shouting. And at the center of it all stood the courthouse doors, heavy, unmoving, waiting for the moment history would step through. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The gallery filled faster than any trial in recent memory. Federal marshals lined every wall. Even court staff moved with rigid tension, their faces pale as if they already knew the storm that was about to hit. When Diddy was brought in, shackles clinking against the floor, the room fell dead silent. His eyes darted left and right, scanning the courtroom like a man expecting enemies in every corner. His attorney leaned in, whispering frantically, but Diddy didn't respond. He looked hollow, haunted. Cassie sat in the back row, still uncomposed. her expression unreadable. She didn't blink as Diddy glanced toward her. She didn't flinch. Her presence was a reminder, a living fracture in a story that refused to end. The judge entered. The courtroom rose, but the energy was different now. When everyone sat again, the judge didn't waste a second. "This hearing," he said, voice cutting through the room, "is convened to address evidence of an attempted escape, possible coordinated misconduct, and the involvement of external criminal parties." A low wave of whispers rippled through the gallery before the judge slammed his gavel once. Silence. The prosecution stood, their expressions set in cold determination. Without preface, without theatrics, they called for the lights to be dimmed and the projector lowered. The first image appeared, a photograph of the busted freight elevator panel deep inside the prison's forgotten corridor. The second image, the pry bar pulled from insulation. The third, the blueprint with the red escape path traced cleanly from Diddy's cell to the sealed supply shaft. Then came the burner phone. Then the shredded fragments assembled into phrases. Then the footprint analysis. Every slide deepened the courtroom's unease, but when the signal booster appeared on screen, the room shifted. It wasn't just an object, it was a revelation, a device that shouldn't exist in a prison, a device with a blinking diode still shining when discovered, a device tied to criminal organizations far beyond New York. The defense attorney rose, objecting loudly, calling the evidence inflammatory, speculative, and unverified. The judge didn't look at him. "Sit down, Mr. Agnifilo," he said, tone cold. "You'll be heard when it is your turn." Then prosecutors played the audio clip. Static, a rustle, footsteps, then a muffled "Oi, on me, Storm window, I confirmed. He moves during blackout. A second voice, smoother, colder. "Get him to the south shaft. Make sure he doesn't hesitate." A pause so long the courtroom felt frozen. Then the final line, "If he talks, we're finished." The sound of that sentence sucked the air from the room. Several reporters stopped typing. One juror, brought in only for advisory review, covered her mouth. Cassie closed her eyes as though she felt the weight of that line deeper than anyone else. The defense scrambled to object again. "This recording is unauthenticated. You cannot—" But the judge leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes burning through the dim lights. "Enough," he said. "The court will consider the evidence in full." Prosecutors continued, revealing the last piece of the puzzle. Security footage showing two masked figures using blind spots between cameras the night before the storm. One swiped a badge, the other carried a black bag. The badge belonged to the guard who vanished. The bag matched the dimensions of the pry bar, blueprint folder, and signal booster. "This, boss," the prosecutor said, voice steady, "is not coincidence. It is coordination." The courtroom erupted, people whispering, gasping, lawyers murmuring. The judge hammered the gavel until the chaos died down. "What we have," the prosecutor continued, "is evidence of a planned escape or forced extraction coordinated by individuals with military-grade precision. Whether Mr. Combs initiated this or whether he was coerced remains under investigation. But the fact remains, he moved toward the escape shaft knowingly and against all prison regulations." The defense attorney tried again to interrupt, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, this is absurd. My client was terrified. He was disoriented during a blackout. He—" The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Agnifilo, you are seconds from contempt. Sit down." The courtroom fell silent again, heavy as stone. The judge then addressed the room directly. His voice was calm, but every word felt like it carried the weight of a verdict already forming in his mind. "We are dealing," he said slowly, "with a level of coordination and internal compromise unlike anything this court has ever seen. The consequences, if proven true, undermine the integrity of the justice system itself." He leaned back, eyes fixed on Diddy. "Court will recess for 90 minutes. When we return, I will deliver the ruling." The gavel struck once. The room exploded into motion. Reporters ran out. Cameras flashed. Crowds outside roared. And Diddy sat alone, shackled, trembling, staring into nothing because he knew what everyone else now suspected. Whether he tried to escape or was forced into the attempt, the judge was about to decide the rest of his life. When the courtroom doors opened again at 4:29 p.m., the silence inside was so complete it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every seat was filled. Reporters sat frozen, fingers hovering above keyboards. Marshals tightened their stance, and at the defense table, Diddy sat motionless, shoulders hunched, wrists cuffed, eyes unfocused as though he had spent the last hours staring into an abyss no one else could see. The judge took his seat slowly, deliberately, with a gravity that sent a chill across the room. His expression was unreadable, but his posture said everything. Whatever was coming next would not be gentle, not lenient, not forgiving. "Please be seated," he said. The room obeyed in unison, the sound of chairs scraping the floor ringing like a final warning. The judge folded his hands. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented in today's emergency hearing. We have examined the recovered devices, the blueprint, the coordinated actions of unidentified individuals, and the audio recordings associated with the attempted breach." He paused, letting the words settle like stones dropping into deep water. "There is no question," he continued, "that a coordinated effort was made inside and outside MDC Brooklyn. The extent of Mr. Combs' involvement remains under investigation. Whether he instigated this plot or whether he was manipulated into it will be determined. But what is undeniable is this: Mr. Combs moved toward a restricted maintenance shaft, a location that aligns with a deliberate escape path." Diddy flinched as though struck. His attorney rose halfway from his chair, whispering urgently, desperate to interrupt. But one look from the judge froze him in place. "This," the judge said, "constitutes a violation of federal custody orders. It constitutes movement toward escape. And most critically, it constitutes an immediate threat to the integrity of the justice system." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Several people leaned forward. Cassie sat perfectly still, jaw clenched, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed straight ahead, and as if witnessing the last chapter of a story she never wanted but could no longer avoid. The judge lifted a sheet of paper from the bench, a document stamped with DOJ markings. "The Department of Justice has recommended sentence enhancement based on escape conspiracy, regardless of level of involvement. This court concurs." Diddy's breathing quickened. His lips parted. His hands trembled inside the cuffs. He whispered something, maybe, "Please, maybe I didn't." But his voice was swallowed by the heavy hush filling the courtroom. The judge's voice deepened. "Mr. Combs, your actions inside MDC Brooklyn represent a direct challenge to federal authority. You were already serving an enhanced sentence for egregious misconduct upon incarceration. Yet instead of complying with custody rules, you participated in, willingly or not, a coordinated breach involving external criminal support." The courtroom's atmosphere thickened, every word pressing down like another layer of earth, bearing something once powerful. "For these reasons," the judge continued, "and in accordance with federal statute, this court hereby imposes an additional sentence." The tension snapped, replaced by a collective intake of breath. "Mr. Combs," the judge said, voice unflinching, "you are sentenced to 40 additional years, consecutive to your existing triple life term." The room erupted. Reporters gasped. Several scrambled to their phones. Others covered their mouths. Marshals tightened grips on their belts. One woman in the back whispered, "Oh my God, he's never getting out. Never." Diddy closed his eyes. Just for a moment, as though letting the words crash over him like a tidal wave he knew he could never stand against. Then his head dropped into his hands, shoulders shaking, lips moving in a whisper no one could hear. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, "due to the involvement of external criminal actors in the demonstrated infiltration of MDC Brooklyn, this court orders that Mr. Combs be transferred to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in the country. The place designed to break the minds of terrorists, cartel leaders, and traitors. A facility so isolated that inmates spend 23 hours a day in concrete boxes barely bigger than parking spaces. Diddy's lawyer stumbled to his feet. "Your Honor, please, this is excessive." He was terrified. He didn't orchestrate this. He didn't plan. The judge shut him down instantly. Sit down, Mr. Agnafilo. The time for argument has passed. He turned back toward Diddy, who was now struggling to breathe, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. You will be transferred immediately, the judge said. This court will not risk further compromise. This ruling is final. The gavel struck, once, twice, a cold, merciless sound that echoed through the courtroom like a vault ceiling shut. Cassie watched without expression, eyes lowering for the first time, not out of sympathy, but in the quiet, heavy acknowledgement that something enormous had just ended. For him, for her, for the entire case. Outside, the courthouse plaza exploded in chaos. Protesters screamed. Supporters cried. Sirens wailed. News banners blasted across screens nationwide. Breaking, Diddy hit with 40 more years. Transferred to ADX Florence. Inside, marshals moved in around Diddy. His cuffs clicked. His ankles were shackled. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His face had drained of every trace of the swagger, pride, or entitlement he once carried. He looked like a man who had just realized the truth. He wasn't escaping. He wasn't negotiating. He wasn't surviving the system. The system had finally buried him. The convoy that carried Diddy out of Manhattan moved like a military operation. Black SUVs surrounded the armored transport vehicle, lights flashing, sirens off, engines humming low beneath the cold night air. Reporters chased the motorcade for blocks before police cut them off. Protesters shouted from sidewalks as the vehicles pushed through the chaos. No one could see inside the reinforced transport cabin, but the world imagined the same thing, Diddy sitting alone, wrists chained to his waist, staring at a future that had collapsed in on him like a concrete tomb. Inside the vehicle, everything was silent except for the hum of the engine. Diddy's breathing echoed in the narrow chamber. His ankles were shackled to the floor, his wrists locked tight. His heartbeat thudded in the tight metal space as the convoy crossed the bridge, heading toward the airport where a federal jet waited to transfer him to Colorado. ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, the end of every road left to him. But while the whole country focused on the man in chains, no one was watching the people who had made sure those chains locked forever. By the time Diddy was fingerprinted, processed, and escorted through the narrow steel corridors of ADX, a new task force had already formed back in New York, Operation South Shaft, a joint FBI-DOJ investigation team tasked with one mission: uncover the shadow network that orchestrated the escape plot. The early discoveries were horrifying. The guard whose badge had been used to access the freight elevator? She never fled. She never ran. Her car was found abandoned near the Verrazano Bridge, keys still in the ignition, driver's side door open. She hadn't been seen since. The contractor, known as Carter, the one whose burner phone fragments matched the shaft messages, was officially classified as a person of interest. But the truth was far worse. His passport recorded an exit from LaGuardia 3 days before the attempted escape, but investigators found no record of him entering another country. His trail simply vanished after Wheels Up. And then there was the shredded note reconstruction. Forensic linguists pieced together more fragments. Sentences that had been wiped twice, scrubbed, broken apart, but not completely erased. Remove the variable. Risk too high if he talks. Keep pressure until extraction. If extraction fails, eliminate. The word eliminate chilled the room. This wasn't an escape plan crafted to save Diddy's life. It was a contingency plan designed to ensure silence. Investigators dug deeper. They accessed old financial logs from Diddy's corporate shell entities. They traced offshore transfers tied to the same names appearing in the reconstructed notes. A pattern emerged: quiet payouts, monthly retainers, silent retainers, connected not to Diddy himself but to third-party handlers who had been circling his empire long before the original trial. For the first time, agents realized the truth. The network that once protected Diddy wasn't loyal to him. It was loyal to its own survival. And the moment Diddy's conviction became irreversible, he stopped being an asset. He became a liability. Meanwhile, inside ADX Florence, Diddy's new life began the moment his cell door closed behind him. The sound echoed like a coffin lid sealing shut. He stood inside the 7 by 12-foot concrete box, one bed, one desk, one sink, one toilet, one narrow slit of a window, and understood the weight of eternity. 23 hours a day alone, no music, no voices, no phone calls except heavily monitored legal lines, no one to manipulate, no one to command, just silence, and the silence terrified him. For the first time in decades, there was no entourage, no assistance, no favors owed, no power, just a man, broken, trapped, forgotten by the world, and hunted by the people who once stood behind him. In Washington, the director of the FBI held a closed-door briefing with senior officials. The findings were summarized on a single sheet of paper. Subject was the target of a controlled extraction designed to facilitate disappearance or fatality. Motivations unknown. Network unidentified. But the last line was the one that shifted the room. Primary threat is not Combs. Primary threat is those who attempted to remove him. The investigation pivoted instantly, not toward Diddy, who was now locked away for life plus 40 years, but toward the invisible hands who had tried to erase him. Back in New York, Cassie stepped out of her SUV into the cold evening wind. Her attorney held the door for her as cameras flashed from across the street. Reporters shouted questions. Do you feel justice was served? Did you know about the escape plot? Do you believe he orchestrated it? She didn't answer any of them. She simply walked into her building, closed the lobby door behind her, and exhaled a breath she had held for years. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't vindicated. She was exhausted. Finally standing on the other side of a mountain she never asked to climb. Meanwhile, in a dim warehouse in Queens, the same one tied to burner phone pings, two unidentified men met in the shadows. One placed a black duffel bag on the table. The other pulled out a laptop showing a live news broadcast. Breaking, Diddy moved to ADX Florence after escape plot ruling. The first man exhaled slowly. He's contained. The second man nodded, but not quiet. A beat of silence passed. Then the man tapped to the laptop screen, right over Diddy's name. We finished this, he said. The warehouse lights flicked off. And in the darkness, one thing became clear. Diddy wasn't the story anymore. He was the fuse. The story now was the network that tried to silence him, and the war that was coming next. The documentary ends on one chilling line. He escaped nothing, but someone out there is afraid of what he might still say.